Good evening. How are you doing?
Hi, ladies and gentlemen. We are on live now, and you can follow us on YouTube. That is the group, the Platinum platform by GDM Metropolis Productions, and it is myself, Viki Esther Chang. And go to Facebook, and you will find me and Richard there. And please share to as many friends as you can if you are with us. And I've got Richard here, my dear friend that I know from the pandemic because we did a show with Richard in 2021 on wealth management. Richard, the director of One Global Services, property services, and you can find him there. And today he's going to tell you more about himself, where he comes from, and the other services that he's also offering through his company. And we're going to talk about something that seemed very serious, but really we're here as friends. I'm going to talk about some of these global trends and global scenarios that's happening around us on a very social level. It is 9:14 p.m. Singapore time on a Monday evening, and that is 9:14 a.m. Singapore American Eastern Standard Time in New York. How are you, Richard?
Great, Vicky. It's great to be back and doing another live show with you.
Richard, Singapore, we are going to have most of our pandemic measures freed or released from 1st of May. And that is a signal, I should say, according to the Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong himself, that it is supposed to signal back to normalcy somehow, to a large extent. And I'm great that we can see through this day. I'm still alive. No, I am thankful that I'm alive. I am thankful, and I don't think we should I don't think we should forget about history. History is there to stay. People have sacrificed their lives, their time in the front line fighting in the pandemic. The doctors, the nurses, healthcare providers. I mean, the people who are providing food for us in the lockdown, even the police, even the social distancing ambassadors. And I think I would like to take this time to thank everyone who have seen us through one of the most phenomenal times of humanity, I should say history in current humanity. We're talking about the world. I mean, think about that, Richard. I don't think in my little peanut mind, my pea mind, that I do understand history, that the whole world actually had a lockdown together in a whole of human history 2020. And for that, I just want to thank everyone from the bottom of my heart. I mean, Richard, let's give a shout out to all the cleaners, the stewardess, people who are just cleaning after you. People are just trying to clean away the COVID. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just living with a heart of gratitude every day. As I read the Bible every day, as I wake up and I talk to my friends, my podcaster friends, internationally, whether they are from India, from Pakistan, from America, from Singapore. We must never forget history. And for the people who sacrificed their lives, I mean, they put their lives on the line. And they put their families' lives on the line. And I don't take what we have gone through lightly. Richard. And because of that, some of these issues seem more pertinent to us. What is the world going to be post pandemic? We're going to talk about polarization. But before that, let's talk about you. Let's introduce yourself to a new audience, whomever you are, and wherever you are, whether you're from the US and New York right now, from America, from South America, from Mexico, where some of my guests and my viewers are from. In the past, I had Ukraine viewers. I don't know where they are right now. I had a Ukraine viewers in the past, and I do have viewers down under, followers, and also I have from India and South Asia, and of course in this part of the world, Malaysia. Say hi to everyone, Richard, and tell people, the fellow viewers, either new or returning, who you are, what you do, and why are you in Singapore right now?
Sure, sure. Well, again, it's great to be back doing a live show, and it's great, that we've got live viewers coming online. Again, my name is Richard Lowe. I work for a company called One Global Property Services, but I'm originally from Oxford, England, but moved out to Asia. My goodness, over 30 years ago, living in Hong Kong after having backpacked around the world and tripped around and seen a lot of the world. Fell in love with Asia, got posted to Singapore in July of 1995, and I've been here ever since. Love living in places like Hong Kong, Singapore, which multicultural societies, and it's almost like a little melting pot of the world here.
Yes, Richard, and that's why I think you are, being one of my best guests before in 2021 for your show for wealth management that everyone can actually look at below, and contact him for wealth management and investments in the UK, and that's why you make such a good co-host. For this series, for this new season, we're going to talk about a lot of issues, and mainly today we're going to talk about polarization. But just as sneak peek to everyone, these are some of the topics we're going to talk about in the next few weeks. Youth unemployment. Will there be sufficient corporate jobs for the millennial generation, or will there be enough sufficient meaningful jobs for that generation? And that is something that I'm really concerned about as I travel around the world and I'm looking at like young, capable, intelligent, young people, but I just wonder if there are enough of good jobs for them, and what happens if there are none. Number two, poverty in first world country. And what does that mean, poverty? Can we have poverty in a first world country? Number three, social media. Are we better off? And what are the trade-off for social media? And we are personality in the social media world, aren't we, Richard? And we're going to talk also about, are we living in a more VUCA environment, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and how does this apply in our professional environment? Next, we're also going to talk about family ties. What can we keep or discard or modify for the next generation, for your children? Next, do you think UK, Europe, or the world is ever going to be the same with what's happening in Ukraine now, and what's happening with people, economy, security, and the business environment? And number eight, is the world a better place now? Is the world going to be a place that we accept differences? Or are we entering into an era as we enter into a post pandemic world, into a more polarized world, wherever we are? So today, this is going to be the question for us. But more importantly, I'd like to invite you, the viewers and the listeners, to come on and write to me at talkaboutlife777 at gmail.com to tell me that you would like to be our guest or one of the commentators for one of these topics. And today we're going to talk about this question. I thought Richard is one of the best person because of his bicultural background. The topic is the world a better place post pandemic? Is the world better? Is there going to be a greater acceptance of differences? Or is it going to be more polarized on various aspects, and interpret it and discuss it in a social way? Because we're not experts in this way, but I think we are in a good way to share our lives, what we've seen as we travel, a life experience, and also for yourself, a bi-culture person moving to Singapore, and your children tri-culture. and also you're doing a very you're doing a business that depends on the globalized economy, right? Richard, tell us what's your take on it. What have you observed in this very short period of 10 years that you've been here in Singapore and also traveling around? Tell us about your take on your view of the world.
Wow. Well, where do you start there? I think I'd like to feel that I've become a global citizen. As I said, born and raised in the UK, but traveled all over the world, initially as a backpacker, but then working in different places around the world. Um, I married a Japanese national. My children have all been born in Singapore. They're Eurasian children living in a country that's a multicultural society that's been very accepting of many different backgrounds and cultures. And I'll put it right out there. I feel that the world is better when it is working in an interdependent manner, as opposed to a polarized way. Um, there are challenges, though. I think that as countries go through different uh, times of struggle, then what
Mm-hmm.
can happen is that people can have the blame game. They can point at people. They want to protect their jobs. They don't like the fact that maybe foreigners are taking their jobs. And unfortunately, the darker side of human nature is that when things aren't going right, very often they look to blame others. And
Yeah.
I think that as the world has changed, I just think about a conversation I had with my parents one day that they told me that my great grandmother never traveled more than 100 miles from the place that she was born. My, my, my grandparents traveled around England, but never traveled overseas. And then I think about my
Mm.
parents and particularly myself, having had the ability, at the age of 24 years old, I'd backpacked around Europe twice. I'd worked in North America in a children's summer camp, and I backpacked around the world. And by the age of 24, had seen a great deal of the world, and felt very grateful actually for the background and upbringing that I'd had, and appreciated that uh, different cultures view the world in a different way. And although I was very fortunate in my background, it's not the only way to perceive and see the world. The way that you're raised and brought up has a major impact on your value system, your beliefs, and how that shapes your thinking. And ultimately, as a nation, depending on the sentiment of the country and the leaders that are involved with it, can have a major impact on how the social stability or instability happens within that country. And I think there's been examples in recent years, whether that be the Brexit that certainly shook the UK and a lot of the world, but when other politicians came in, Trump had a certain view about putting America first,
Oh
and
yes,
obviously recently we've
yeah, and
had.
yeah, and I would like to ask more about Brexit and also about 2020, just before Donald Trump stepped down. The world was very very different. And even before you talk about that, I would like to share with the viewers about the latest news that just came out yesterday. In France, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, is elected to the second term as the French president for the second term, which is first in 20 years. Because for the last 20 years, it was just a one-term president. And he was voted with a resounding 58.8%, which is almost 60%. And his competitor, Marie Le Pen, has just garnered 41 percent of the votes, and of course the turnout was about 60% of the people who turn out. And you're right. I just want to put this in this backdrop about we are entering into a world whereby it can go both ways, right? You've got Brexit, right? like what you say, I hope that you can shine light on it. And we have got Donald Trump that came on who talked about, like what you say, America first, or just having that supremacy, whatever supremacy it is. I'm not going to even say white supremacy. And also, right now, we've got a very hotly contested debate in Europe, with refugees going into, from Ukraine going into UK, and the new legislation has just passed in the Parliament in the UK, which is going to stop refugees from coming in, right? But we're not going to talk about politics. We're going to talk about social observation, how it impacts us as just a mortal being living in this world. But Richard, my take for you is I'm glad that Macron won, because when I was there, and I'm still going back to France, is that the feeling is that there is such a, for a big segment of the country, there are people who are anti-globalization. They want nothing to do with the rest of the world. They just want to go in their own ways. They don't want to use the internet. They don't want anything with the rest of the world. Being a very conservative part of the country, and I'm talking about the deep part of the country whereby people are not in the capitals. They're not in Paris, they're not in London, or in Singapore or New York. But there is also another group of young people that is starting to embrace globalization through technology, through the, I should say, through the immersion of social media, etc. So we're talking about that, I should say, the juxtaposition of history now. It could go both ways. You could go the Donald Trump way, whereby world can be polarized because people are becoming more, they're facing a much more competitive world because of jobs. Companies are pulling out from certain rural areas to other rural or cities because of more competitive environment for companies to survive and to thrive. And we're also talking about some place like in Singapore and Asia whereby it is open. We depend on the global trading hub where people need to transvest, right? So we aren't going to, we could possibly go either way. I don't know. And the
Well,
world has shut down for 2 years. What do you think,
yeah, I mean,
Richard?
to interject, I often think that on an individual basis, do you have a scarcity mentality or an abundance mentality?
Yeah.
Does a government have a scarcity mentality or an abundance mentality? And I think if somebody looks, at a glass and they see that it's half full and they have an abundant sort of mentality, that's going to come out in the way they view the world, the way they think about the world, and embrace the world. But if you have a scarcity mentality and you're always scared that somebody else is potentially taking something away from you, then I can understand how people are concerned and they want to protect and keep and hold on to what they have. And but I'm a great believer that in an interdependent world, when a group works synergistically, we
Mm.
can we can create more, we can achieve more, as opposed to just looking at our own little world and trying to protect, our surrounding and our environment. And the point I was trying to make about the different generations is that within 100 years, the world has rapidly changed to be much more global, much more interconnected. And because of that ability to interconnect, whether that's the speed of travel to be able to get around, the power of the internet, which is probably one of the biggest inventions that's impacted the world in our lifetimes, of connecting the world and speeding up the way that we communicate. And if we can use these things as a positive to benefit, then I believe that being interdependent is a much stronger way if we can embrace the differences between us and enhance them and look at them as a way that we can complement each other, and by complementing, be better than trying to, do it ourselves.
And to be more specific, to raise certain examples to you, Richard, polarization and globalization, and whether we will actually go to that, that contingent, right? The contingency that we're going to go back to the era whereby all of us prefer to be in a homogeneous community. I don't think we'll ever get back to kind of homogeneous society. Being the world we are in with the globalized technology and of course globalized transportation. But I do want to raise a couple of observations when I was in France, so that we can talk about this a little bit deeper. When I was in France, and because France has got, I don't know, maybe France is one of the strongholds of the world that is anti globalization. That is what I think a lot of people have that impression, because they don't want to speak English, they don't want to be connected, they just want to preserve the history and the culture, which I think is right. And when I first went there, I had a lot of reservations. I do. I have a lot of reservations because I was afraid what people will say when you tell them that you're going to live there for more than 3 months. I think you must have heard about stories like that. Like, oh, you got to tell them that you're just there for a week, otherwise people will throw you out. And you got to speak French really well. And that was my first reservation, being in a place whereby people were just anti globalization, and they were in a particular world whereby they prefer to be just amongst themselves. If we look at the world right now, do we want that? And let me just also iterate and give a couple of examples that when I went there, I stayed in an apartment. Of course, they're all French, right? In a town whereby they're all French, and nobody speaks English, of course, because you're talking about one of those older towns where the folks are old, and because the young people have all gone to Paris or London, they don't want globalization. They don't want people to be coming in. They don't want people who look different, speak different, and dress differently. They don't want people to be coming into a restaurant to not know how to make an order of or appreciate kind of food. So
Why do you
yeah.
think? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is in certain countries and certain cultures or certain age demographics, whatever it may be? What do you think triggers that in somebody?
Thank you for the question, which I am trying to arrive is that when I lived in France, I did travel quite a lot. And the thing is that, to answer your question, I lived in China too, right? I lived in China for some years, and I lived in France for some years. And of course, I live in Singapore. I've traveled to 25 countries in the world. I've made a lot of observations. And therefore, this is a topic that I would like to talk about, what my observations are, the pros and cons of polarization and the pros and cons of going forward. What if we fall to the other side? So now I'm going to talk about the deep countries. When you go to America, you go to France, you go to a huge country, and I'm not sure in the UK. I've been there as a tourist, but not really lived there. They do not need to interact with the world, Richard, because they are self-sufficient. They've got localized jobs, they've got localized economies. They don't have to depend on the tourism money. They don't have to depend on technology to grow, because they've got their local economy, and people are okay with that because they're small. And of course, therein lies another debate, a question about young people fleeing the old towns, right? So that aside, but talking about that question that you just raised, these people have not really interacted with the world. They see people who are different from them with a lot of suspicion. There's not much trust. And having said that, there's not much trust. speak their language, they feel uncomfortable because you put them out of the comfort zone. And they've seen a lot of stories whereby you've got these immigrants who come in and encroach on their land and take away the culture and the history. They are. And with great respect, they are justified to have that kind of fear. And I think a lot of us are. If that speed is moving faster than what people can absorb, that curve, right? There's an interaction of the curve, right? If the changes are that fast, the rate of change is that fast, but people can't cope with that change, there will come a point whereby that's going to be that huge implosion. So I'm just talking about respecting that. But however, I still want to say that, Richard, even with that interaction and the fear with them, having lived with them, and if they start to find out about you and you gain that kind of trust, they do accept the different kind of culture and they do accept the beauty of differences. So this is the point where I'm trying to get at. Will we ever arrive at a point whereby people do accept differences where the speed of curve of technology is changing so fast, but the people are trying to catch, where the people are coming into your face, but you want to accept them, but you can't because your house is being encroached, your land is being encroached. I think this is the pinnacle. This is the point where we're talking about. I've come to places whereby finally they do accept differences. Finally, they do accept you, and they do accept you being different, you not knowing their language. They do want to reach out because they do see the beauty of that difference. But I think that point is, at what point will we arrive at that curve that intersect, where that balance of equilibrium, where the speed of change versus the change in people's mentality and acceptance before the implosion comes about. That's what I find in a
Yeah,
very deep country, in a huge country that does not need globalization. To answer your question, Richard.
just to sort of almost read between the lines there and cut to the chase, it's kind of like, well, is there an element of prejudice that
Yeah,
occurs in somebody, whether it's conscious or unconscious? And
yeah,
until a relationship has been made so that you can get to know somebody, know that, all right, maybe they speak a different language. Maybe they look a little different. Their hair color is different. Their eyes look a little bit different. But as you get to know somebody, ultimately, I think there are more things that connect us than divide us, even though our looks, our languages, the way we speak, the way we talk, the food that we eat, certainly there are differences. And I think it's really comes down to, often people can be conscious and unconscious about prejudice. But once you have broken down some of those perceived prejudices or sometimes unconscious prejudice, you realize that, we are very, very similar from one culture to another.
yes,
And
yeah, yeah. And Richard, I'd like you to talk about your interpretation of Brexit and that point of 2020, the election. Donald Trump is now voted out. What was that point that you talked about Brexit? How do you feel as being born from the UK, and you've got someone, what's his name? Oh, that guy. I can't remember his name. And Nigel, do you know that guy, Nigel?
Nigel Lawson, he's a politician from many years ago. He used to be the
Yeah.
Chancellor of the Exchequer during
I,
Margaret Thatcher's
I,
days.
I'm going to talk. I'm going to find out about his name. But about
Okay.
people who were talking about Brexit and people like Donald Trump, they are trying to trump other people away. Now, tell us about what is Brexit, and what does it mean to you and mean to the people then, before Brexit, and now Brexit.
Well, first of all, when the Brexit referendum happened back in, I think it was May or June of 2016, and the UK voted to exit the EU, it was a very close vote. And over the years, it was on one side, the vote was the easy bit. It was actually, how do we now go about untangling all of the issues to go through this very messy divorce of leaving the EU? And it divided the nation. It was such a close vote. It divided families. You have families that were
fighting.
It was almost
killing over
it was
each other.
almost like a social and political civil war of sorts. It really did, polarize the country. And I was personally shocked when we voted to leave, because again, my mentality is that we live in an interdependent world, and because the world is becoming more and more connected and more globalized, it seemed to be taking a backwards direction. Now, I also got to understand the arguments, having not lived in the UK for many years. I also got to understand some of the arguments for Brexit, and I do appreciate that having more autonomy to make your laws and your rules. The fact that you're pumping in, I think, something like 100 billion euros a month or something like that, some huge figure that's going into
the EU,
the euro, subsidizing other countries, and many other things that, as an independent country, you have the autonomy to make those laws, make those rules to benefit your nation in a better way. So, it's a tough argument, but I still felt that, my goodness, the UK seems to have taken a step in a backward direction, with a viewpoint that the world is becoming more interdependent and more globalized, and yet we are voting to leave the EU and stand on our own 2 feet. And in an interdependent world, is that a wise decision?
Yeah, and also during that time, and I think it is already starting that the a lot of British are migrating out because of Brexit, and they are going to France. I'm thinking, why are they coming to France, a more polarized country? But I'm just thinking.
They speak French.
Yeah, no.
French.
A lot of people don't. A lot of Brits
the
don't.
English don't. They're terrible. The English are terrible. I agree.
Yeah. But I just want to raise. You are such a unique person, in the eyes of the viewers, but definitely not the only one, because I've got lots of American and European friends who have resided in Singapore, the bankers, right? I've been like 20, 30 years in the banking industry. If they're married here with the Singaporean wives or the Malaysian wives, and they made a life in Asia. But for the viewers out there, and they don't live in Singapore or Asia. You're talking about deep countries, right? You're talking about huge countries like in Europe, like in America, Mexico, Canada. And I'm not even going to talk about Canada, because I heard so much glowing feedback about Canada, that they're very accepting of differences. But I just want to talk about you yourself, as a person who is bicultural, your children who are tricultural. Do you think the world is going to be better for them, honestly, going forward? Like from a continuum of 1 to 10, do you think the world is going to be 10 being the best, 1 being like most conservative, inward looking? Where do you think the world is moving for your children?
Sure. First of all, to answer it directly, I think yes is the answer. On a scale of 1 to 10, I think I would sort of be leaning towards 7, being a more positive approach. And again, I have the viewpoint that we are going to live in a world that becomes more and more connected. We can see the fact that air travel, which allows us to visit different countries and cultures, is only on the increase. We're now looking at going into space and possibly other planets as well. And so I do think that over time, as cultures mix and get to know each other more, yes, there'll always be challenges and issues, but at the same time, there will be more opportunities to hopefully understand each other's cultures and build bridges rather than barriers. And And if I can't say that with Eurasian kids, then, I think it's a pretty poor show in that respect. I have thought, just to throw it out there, again, living in Singapore, I've asked my 4 kids, have you ever been teased for being Eurasian? And amazingly, not once have they been teased, even though they look a little bit different. They look a little Asian, they look a little European, but not your classic Chinese or Malay or Indian. They look a little bit different, but yet they've never been teased in Singapore. And that's been a great thing that if they were living in either the UK, depending on where they lived in the UK, or their mother, is from Japan, if they lived in Japan, I'm sure that they will have had some level of teasing at some stage, but they've had nothing here in Singapore. And I think part of the credit to that is Singapore has managed this multicultural society where it, even within the public housing areas, it has a policy to integrate these different cultures so that from the day that you are born, you are exposed to these different cultures so that you are living alongside these different cultures. You're playing with these different cultures. These people in your block are from different religions, different ethnic groups, the different food, they speak, their mother tongues are different languages. And although it would be naive to say that there's never any issues and there aren't some underlying issues. Overall, though, the society has been able to integrate and work together, whether it be in sports teams, whether it be in a company, typically in a very, very good way. And I think it's been a great model that maybe a lot of other countries could learn from.
Yeah, and I think we both of us, yourself, raised about being so hopeful about the world going forward, and I do, that's why on a personal level myself, having been traveling over 20 countries, 25 countries, having lived in China, almost a homogeneous country, but not now anymore. Having lived in France, Singapore, and my hope is that, going back to what I just said about the curve, if the opening of every country, which is good, I'm not saying it's good, not good, I think it's good, the speed of which it opens up, the speed of the world interact, or the speed at the rate at which competition is raised, the bar is raised, versus the speed of acceptance and people being able to amalgamate with other culture. If that can be managed, then I think it's going to be a very a much better world. So we're talking about the interaction, about the speed of both curves, but I don't want to talk about business and jobs.
Can I just add one more thing before
Yeah,
we move on, perhaps to the next topic? And having been born and raised in the UK, when I
yeah,
was a young boy, Northern Ireland or Ireland was split between the Protestants and the Catholics.
yeah.
And so often on the news, there was bloodshed between
Mm,
the same countrymen. One group is Catholic, one group is Protestant. And the point that I want to make is here we've got a situation whereby you've got, Caucasians living in the
mm,
same country, but
mm,
on one side of the street, it could be a Catholic row of houses. And on literally the other side of the street, you could have a Protestant. And there are different
mm,
places in Belfast where the whole neighborhood is Catholic, the other neighborhood is Protestant.
mm.
And
And they
and
don't
what
interact.
what
Yeah.
and well, this is where I'm coming to. It's that from day one, the children are born into a society with if they're Catholic, the parents, the peers, the friends are all reinforcing almost a hatred between the other side.
Sure.
And I remember reading one of Anthony Robbins' books and
Mm,
him talking about how a value and a belief can be reinforced. And he uses the analogy of a table. And the
mm,
tabletop is imagine that's the belief. And
mm,
every time a significant other in your life reinforces that belief. It's like putting another leg under that table and another leg
Stronger.
under that table and another leg, to the point where that belief becomes so ingrained
Yes.
that it becomes almost impossible to break down. And a classic scenario that's happened all over the world, it's not just Northern Ireland, when we look at how people are born into a society where hatred has caused them to create such a strong belief that it's just so difficult to cross the bridge and understand the world from the other person's perspective. And this is why, again, when it comes to a country like Singapore, where we've both lived a significant number of years, what they've done is made a policy to integrate people from day one, so that some of the values and beliefs that maybe somebody has, hopefully they can recognize that, well, maybe that wasn't based on the right principle. Maybe I should rethink my value system here. My own children, they all went to local schools. They have friends who are Chinese, Malay, Indian, and I really don't think they look at them. They go beyond the color of their skin and the language. And yeah, we all have jokes about the cultural differences at times, but not in a hurtful or way that's ridiculing. And this is why I think it's so important that as humans, we are raised in a country whereby, generally speaking, if we're not living in a very cosmopolitan place, we are surrounded by people that look like us, think like us, eat the same food, have the same values. And then when somebody comes into their life or their neighborhood that looks a bit different, thinks a bit differently, has been raised in a different way, depending on whether you have an open mind to embrace differences or to reject them, has a major impact on how that person is accepted. And ultimately, although there are always going to be differences between people, I think there is, again, far more that connects us, that we have commonality in, than divides us.
Yeah, I think that's a speech for the Prime Minister. Are you gonna be his speechwriter?
Maybe I should put an application in, huh?
So that's your other job as a speechwriter.
I have a Chinese name, Lowe, so my last name is
Yes.
already
No, the thing is that
somewhat
people
Chinese.
exactly, you must have lived through it in order to understand it and to be able to see it. I mean, there are lots of people who don't see it. Um, and you're right, and you've put it in such a beautiful way about embrace. And this is the principle that I always uphold, for the audience and for Richard. For a time in my life, I was actually lecturing. I was actually teaching in the polytechnics in Singapore. I was teaching entrepreneurship, and you are right. Like your children being in the school, right? You don't want them to go into all, I should say, all British girls' school. You don't want her to go into or the all girls school, for example, right? You don't want her to just go into all girls school. You want her to be in a co-ed school. And when I was teaching, just to echo what you say, there are lots of foreign students who come in. And even when I was in France, I was going back to the university to learn French. The people, which is because of the natural selection of being the same, you will tend to go with the same people, right? The principle of projection. You are just going to be with the people that look like you. So when I was teaching, and also because when I was going back to the university, the people tend to stick together. Someone from a different country, they come into the university, they tend to stick together. They could be X nationality, and I find that it's important to break that down, or to break groups being together strongly. so that they are able to interact with the rest of the people who are different. Because there's so much safety in familiarity, right? When you are with someone you like, someone you know what they're thinking, you know what they're doing next. And my point is that my advice to this group of students, I say that don't go in as a group, because if you go as a group in more than threes, the rest of the people are not going to interact with you because you are in a group. However, if you are in two or one, people do want to interact with you because they know that you are alone. But if you are in a group, people don't want to interrupt. Not that people are afraid of you, but they didn't want to interrupt because you are already in a group. And when I talked to these students, I told them that, hey, don't go in a group during your recess period. Don't go in your groups after class. Try to just be with other groups who look different. And they may need a bit of getting out of your comfort zone. They may need a little bit of learning curve because you need to speak in the local language to learn something. But I think until that happens, it's going to be really hard for, like what you said, getting people to understand and find out commonalities and also to gain trust through understanding. I think there must be some form of steps. Like your children, right? I mean, they go into a school, they were so young. It's a no-brainer because they were so young, right? They were just like a couple of Eurasian kids in the school. I mean, they go to an environment where I think they could naturally be naturalized.
Yeah, well, from day one, from when they were playing in the playground in the condos, they're playing with children from all over the world. Um, you know, let me ask you a question. If you were to go to a dinner banquet with where there's 12 people sitting at a table, would you prefer to sit at a table where every single person is from the same country, or sit at a table where every single person is from a different country? Which would make for a more interesting and more lively conversation?
Okay. Okay, let me answer your question. Typically, the people around me will go to people who are like them. But because I have traveled around the world, I make a conscious effort. The thing is that it's not a natural thing. You have to make an extra effort to embrace that kind of differences and to embrace the kind of challenge because you don't know where they come from. And until that happens, people will still stick around with their own people. I mean, I love conversations. That's why I'm a podcaster, right? I like to talk to people from Africa. I like to talk to people from India, Pakistan, Ukraine, Mexico. I love that. I think it is because of the precondition that and the privilege that I already had because I traveled around the world. After I graduated, I traveled around the world and I lived in different parts of the world for my job. I was able to interact with different nationalities, giving talks in conferences, etc. That did not pose as a daunting task to me. However, to a lot of people around me, they will naturally choose a table whereby they will sit with people who are similar to them because that's just a natural selection, right? You will go to them because you're just going to talk about the food in Singapore, where you're going to go over the weekend, etc., instead of going to deep conversations. Unless we go to the world whereby, like now, Richard, we are able to connect with the world in a way whereby it doesn't take too much money from traveling because traveling by itself is a barrier of entry because it costs a lot to go to another country. Maybe by social media, maybe by technology, that could be another avenue to reach out to let people of different background interact and understand each other, which is already what's happening with the millennial generation. But you are right. Until someone takes that step, that initial step of being wanting to be uncomfortable and taking on a challenge to be in a different group, then that will not happen, Richard.
Sure. And I think it comes back to this. You know, you've been fortunate, like myself, to travel around the world. And by traveling around the world, that's exposed you to different cultures. It's put you in situations where you've sometimes forced to have to integrate. Sometimes you'll choose to integrate, and sometimes we will perhaps take an easy approach. Well, yeah, I'll just stick with my own. But I think it goes back to the same thing. Is like, if you are exposed to an environment where you are meeting people from different walks of life with different cultures, backgrounds, and all the other things that we've mentioned, that you start to appreciate the differences and hopefully see that, okay, these guys aren't so different. Yes, they've been brought up in a different culture, but fundamentally, you know, they're looking for peace. They're looking for happiness in their life. They're often searching, you know, for their spiritual maker. Our fundamentals of what we look for almost across cultures is the same.
Richard,
But
I've
how
got
we
a
view the
question for
world is
you.
the
I've
same.
got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think you wouldn't mind me telling the audience or the viewers that, you know, you've got a Japanese wife, right?
That's right.
No, that is really something I think a lot of people should learn from you also. How do you and a Japanese, particularly a Japanese who could be conservative, I should say reserved, right? We don't know their political
Yeah.
inclination, but someone
Yeah.
who's supposedly reserved from the external point of view, because we really don't know. I really don't know. Reserved, and then you, being a Brit, you know, have backpacked around. And I do understand your wife stayed in Italy at a young
Yes.
age.
Yeah.
So, like, tell us, how does that journey of transformation and getting to conform to a new kind of common culture, the bi
A
culture
third
happen?
culture,
The
almost like a
third
third
culture.
culture. Yeah.
How does it happen?
Yeah. I think first of all, and then one of the nice things of living in places like Hong Kong, Singapore, is that there are a lot of people with international marriages.
Yeah.
And so I've spoken to many people. I go to an international Baptist church and we meet people from all over the world. There's about 54 nations represented. But I think, first of all, if your personality and character is somebody that embraces understanding and finds it
Mm,
exciting to learn about new cultures, you can be
mm,
drawn to somebody. And I'm sure that was partly what drew me, you know, towards my wife, is that it's exciting to learn about a new culture and a new way of life, a new language, a new country to go to, travel
yeah.
to, new food to try. And for me, it was like, you know, at a young age, when I
Mm,
finished university, the first thing I wanted to do was go around the world and explore the world and see the world,
yeah.
and see the, you know, outside of the way that I had been brought up. There's a big wide
Yeah.
world I wanted to go out and explore.
Mm,
One of the challenges of an international marriage is that in any marriage, communication, the breakdown of communication, is one of the fundamental challenges that causes problems in marriages. And one of the challenges of international marriages is that um, you you've got two people with two different mother
mm,
tongues,
yeah.
and the potential then for misunderstandings and
Yeah.
miscommunications is even higher than
Mm,
a marriage between two people who are fluent in the same language, the same body language. And certainly in Japanese culture, there is so much that is unspoken
yeah.
communication that unless you are born in Japan
Yeah.
and absolutely fluent, you will not pick up on the nuances. But
Mm,
here's the thing that I've learned, and I've spoken to many other people with international marriages as well, is that although culture and background and upbringing will strongly impact people's values and beliefs,
mm-hmm.
character will
Character.
trump culture. Character will trump culture. And what I
Well
mean by
said.
that is that if you have somebody that has a very, you know, strong personality
Yeah.
or a very placid personality, that I found in my personal experience has a bigger impact on your relationship than the culture and the background that they've been brought up in.
Okay.
So again, I'll say,
cite a couple of examples. Now, this is really intriguing because we are moving in a world whereby there's going to be a lot of international marriages, right? Um, Definitely, that is going to be the trend. Tell us, could you cite a couple of examples? Because I am intrigued about, like, your wife. She's reserved. She holds on to a lot of a strong Japanese tradition, right? I could imagine a lot of tradition in the Japanese culture, and yourself having a kind of different background, like what you say, a table that has more and more legs below it, right? Of a different kind of value or the way you see the world. Is there like two instances whereby you kind of have a divergent viewpoint, and how did you resolve that? That would be an interesting thing for the rest of us to learn.
yeah. Let me try and think of a good example. In terms of character trumping culture, maybe I try giving an example of that. My wife basically isn't what I would call your typical Japanese. She left Japan at the age of 20. She never lived there again. She made a conscious decision. She actually went to a summer camp when she was a teenager in America, and that was the first time she went overseas. And I think she sort of just was amazed about a different country. The US obviously has a multicultural society. I think she went to a camp in California somewhere, and that was the trigger for her to want to travel and see the world. And it's quite unusual for a single Japanese lady to leave Japan. This is a generalization what I'm about to say, but more often than not, it's because the husband has been posted overseas and the wife has followed the husband. It's rarer to see a single Japanese lady overseas. So she's and especially at the age of 20 years old, she made a decision. She had virtually no money. She lost a job at one stage, and she had the will to say, "Look, I'm not going to go back to the parents in Japan. I'm going to find a way to live." And she, at one stage, she had such little money. She was literally just living off spaghetti and butter. And I'm not joking. She had virtually no money, but she did not want to go back to Japan. She made a decision to live in Europe and Italy at that time. And so, when it comes to challenges and issues, then certainly the way that she's been brought up has shaped her thinking a great deal. But she has a very strong, independent, dare I say, Asian tiger. If our viewers will understand
how do you explain that to the viewers? Explain to the viewers, and let me just make a precursor. Tiger mom or tiger dad is someone that really is strict in terms of demanding results, academic results, and performance from your children. Really, really strict, and they want them to be like the top. And this is not something that is uncommon in Singapore or in Asia, particularly like in Japan too, right? But yeah, and that tell me about that, because your international marriage, we can take a leaf from it in terms of living with people around us, our neighborhoods, people who are different. Tell us about how did you handle that? Which it goes, it is from your grain, right? I mean, there are certain decisions is from the grain of a being.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, it was a conscious decision to marry somebody from a different country and a different culture. And that's why I like to think that, I am a walking testimony of a global citizen, that, you've got two people from very different backgrounds who come together in a marriage. That is exciting, but at the same time can throw up more challenges. But to go back to the Asian tiger, sort of analogy, then dare I say, in Japanese culture, it's quite often seen that the wife is quite submissive, maybe sort of a step behind the husband, doesn't say too much, but in the closed doors of the home, I can tell you that it could be very, very different. And with somebody like my wife, who's got very strong views,
Yeah.
and dare I say, has certain elements of the tiger mum, which
Yeah.
is somebody that demands a great deal from their children, puts a very high value on academics,
Yeah.
pushes the children, and that's one of the things I'm conscious of living in a place like Singapore,
Yeah.
that it's heavily driven the culture here to education, getting a paper evaluation certificate, and I absolutely value the quality and the benefit of an educated mind. I try to take a bit more of a role of a mentor coach personality within the home, and I suppose more. Uh, I value in education, but I also value character development and trying to find that right balance between, an Asian tiger mum and a Western individual that is understanding that navigating the challenges of life, uh, character, and the ability and the tenacity to overcome problems and challenges and address those is probably equally, if not more important,
Sure.
to succeeding in life than
Yes.
a paper qualification. Again, I'm not trivializing
I
an
totally
education.
agree
It's,
that
it's
no,
hugely valued.
yes, the education just gives you the opportunity to put your foot at the door.
Yes,
Yeah, it's the
yes.
character that makes you successful. No, I totally agree with you on that, and I want to ask you the particular scenario. Like, how do you balance that? You're talking about two persons with diametrically values, and then you've got a child in the middle. Now, tell me, how does this conversation go? For example, your children brings home your child brings home the test paper with like 50 marks out of 100, and the wife says no, no, no. And the cane is and she's kind of like waving the cane, and the
Cane.
husband, yeah, with the cane, and the husband comes in and saying, no, she's worked hard, we should give her a pat on the back. Now tell me what happens next.
Well, I think it would actually go back to the individual child. If I wasn't
Tell
the
me
best
a real
academic,
tell me the real scenario, Richard. Don't run away from that.
right?
Tell me the real
Okay.
scenario.
So yeah, so dare I say, my wife, being more of the Asian tiger, will give them a real
Yeah,
scolding,
yeah.
basically. My mum would have said a thick ear, which is like a clip round the head or something. What I'll generally do is take an approach of, first of all, letting the kid explain themselves, give them an opportunity to say, what went wrong, and how can we learn from it to improve on it moving forwards. If at the end of the day I've noticed that the child has been goofing off and slacking, then I might become a bit more of an Asian tiger father or mother scenario as well. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that, you know, in that specific scenario, if the child has put in every effort they possibly can and they did their best and they got 50, then I'll give them all the support and encouragement I can. That might not always come out the same way with an Asian tiger mum.
Exactly. Like, and this is the scenario. Like, if you were to extrapolate this to a much macro scenario, like people with a very different value, looking at the same situation, have a different kind of reaction and outcome, right? And I think we were talking about the situation in a world whereby if we can come to a place where we do accept the other person's value, then we will accept that outcome because we're talking about this polarized world that we will possibly be going into post pandemic, right? When the world goes out, when all of us go out there after the border is open, I can foresee there's going to be revenge travel, revenge intersection, cross intersection of the world coming to Singapore and going abroad, etc. I mean, I do foresee that it's already happening now. Like and Richard, you being yourself and you being in this international marriage with your wife, how do you resolve differences in terms of like divergent views? Quarrel, sit down for a talk, make the other person accept your view, or you accept the other person's view, or do you just walk away? How does it work?
Well, it sounds like a marriage guidance session now.
No, but it's an extrapolation to the neighbors, right? When
Yes,
we do
yes,
face
yeah,
differences with your neighbor, yeah.
yes. It's
I don't like
conflict.
the food.
You
I
know,
don't like the food that they're cooking and it's coming into my house, for example.
conflict resolution. It's a life skill, isn't it? And
Yeah,
that goes into to marriage. It goes into our work relationships. It goes
yeah.
into, our friends. So, a life skill is how do we resolve conflict? How do we resolve the differences between two people or two groups or two nations as we escalated up the scale?
Mm.
And again, I often like to quote Stephen Covey in his 7 habits. And, one of his habits is think win-win. And what does he discuss when he's talking about how to find a solution when
Mm.
two people have very different opinions? And, he discusses about, seek first to understand, and that is to understand the other person's
Mm.
point of view,
Mm.
and then to be understood. That is,
Mm.
make sure that the other person has an opportunity to understand your point of view, even to the point that both parties repeat it back to the other person to make sure that they do understand and they can articulate it. So that once you've got an understanding from a frame of reference from the other person's perspective, is there then a third alternative that can be found that is a better solution than either one's individual opinions? Now, this is an ideal, I must admit, but it
Mm.
is a challenge whereby whether it's a married couple, whether it's an ethnic group, whether it is the differences between the bulk of what people believe within the nation or between two nations.
Mm.
How do we resolve conflict? And I think that at the end of the day, diplomats hopefully understand this, is that we do it through communication. We do it through discussion. We do it by listening and trying to really empathize and understand the other person's point of view before we try and ram down the throat of the other person our own opinion, and have never really taken the time to fully appreciate and understand the frame of reference where the other person is coming from. And I think that this is a key way when it comes to whether it's conflict resolution in a marriage or conflict resolution between, who knows, the Ukraine and Russia as an
Yeah.
example, and what's happening in the world at the moment.
Yep. And while you are um, talking about this, I'm just looking at some of this other things that we should talk about. Now, I know we are already an hour into our discussion. I hope that we can continue with this because we are just like on the surface. But, you have a business that really depends on globalization. A lot of your business depends on Asians investing in UK or in Europe or vice versa, etc. Um, do you think what I want to ask you specifically? What are the successful factors business like that to thrive? What are the factors for them to thrive besides people having money?
Yeah. Well, in real estate, the fundamental dynamics of a property market is that, if property prices are rising, rental prices are rising, it is a safe haven place to invest. People can make money, they feel comfortable with it. You can invest, but things change. And Brexit was a good example of that. When
Yeah.
Brexit hit, um, there were some companies that were only involved with the UK real estate market.
Mm,
And once the Brexit referendum occurred and the shock around the world that the UK had voted to leave, no one quite knew how it was going to unfold. And investors don't like shocks. And for
mm,
3 to 6 months after that referendum,
mm,
doesn't matter whether it was the company I was working with at the time
mm,
or almost any other company that was involved with selling real estate to international investors around the globe, no one was buying because they thought, well, is the
mm.
UK economy going to fall off a cliff? Is the real estate prices going to suddenly plummet? Let me wait and see. And for 4 or 5 years, through all the shenanigans of the Brexit and the ongoing issues and it was an embarrassment and a joke in terms of the debates that were going on in Parliament and not being able to get this huge issue resolved. And as a result, it caused some major challenges, even though the fundamentals of the UK property market were very sound. Just the negative news that was coming out
The
day in, day
sentiment,
out put a
investor
cloud over
sentiment. Yeah.
The UK, and so investors naturally think, well, if I'm going to put my hard-earned cash into a property, then maybe I should think about somewhere else, not the UK, until it gets itself sorted out. So there's a classic example of how a decision by a nation can suddenly impact a certain industry, and I'm sure it impacted many other industries, not just the real estate one.
Yeah, and I remember, oh yes, the politician was Nigel Farage. Am I right? He
I
was the
think,
one who was
yeah, if
holding
I'm
the flag for Brexit. Yeah, one of
yes.
the best friends of Donald Trump on the other side of the
Yes, that's
globe.
right. Yes.
Nigel
Yeah.
Farage, yeah, yeah. I mean, he's
Yeah.
such a character. And okay, even before we go off for today, I hope that we can come back and continue, or we can talk about topic number two. The next question, for your business, because it is a business that I should say at the forefront of globalization. It depends on foreign investments. Um, Now, in with Brexit, right? Do you think that people do accept on that personal level? Do they accept foreigners going in more or in less now on the personal and on the social level?
Sorry, say that again. Do they accept going into war, did you say?
No. Okay. Do they accept foreigners investing into UK more or less now on the personal level?
Are you saying do the British people accept
Yeah.
foreigners
Yeah.
investing?
Yeah.
Okay. That's
But
an interesting balancing
I can
act.
tell you because in France there is an overriding kind of atmosphere or climate because of the history or the way it's being led by the politicians. It has always been a climate of rejection of foreigners, even from investments from international foreigners. There's always been that mentality of me versus you, you versus me. You're coming in to take my country away. You're investing here means you're taking a piece of my country away from me. So there always has been this kind of climate, and I'm not saying that everyone on the personal level feel it, but it's just on a very huge social societal climate, and I think
Yeah.
that's why the election by Macron has won quite resoundingly in the context of Europe with 50, almost 60%. It is a rejection of being inward looking again. They do want to move the country forward because the policies is being based on moving forward and march, right? Moving forward. So I just want to know, like in UK with Brexit, is there such a climate now that okay, you're a foreigner coming in, you are taking a piece of my country away from me?
I think ultimately it comes down to is is it benefiting me as an individual? Is it benefiting my country? If it's benefiting, then people will probably embrace it with open arms. If they feel threatened by it, or they feel that foreigners coming in are driving up prices and it's becoming unaffordable, then of course
Yeah,
there's going to be resistance. But let
yeah.
me look at two sides of this coin. On one side, you could say, well, by having FDI, a foreign domestic investment coming
Yeah.
in, this, as an example, it might be a foreign investor that is funding a major grade A office space in your city. The funding is coming in, but it costs money to build property. And that property is going to be creating grade A office space, which is going to attract the likes of grade A uh, companies, multinational companies. I'll give you an example. In Birmingham, the second largest city in the UK, there is an area called Paradise Square. And Birmingham historically was a very old industrial city, maybe not the most attractive in the past, but has been transformed through major regeneration. And literally in the last 12 months, you've had the likes of Goldman Sachs opening major office space, PwC bringing in over 1,400 employees
Price
to the
Waterhouse.
city. So, HSBC have now relocated their retail banking headquarters to Birmingham from London. Barclays have done a similar thing. I've heard Deutsche Bank and even I think Standard Chartered. So here's an opportunity whereby you may have foreign investment coming in, creating jobs. So there are two sides to a coin. On one side, the government is the facilitator to try and find the right balance between bringing investment in, which is going to boost the economy, which is going to create jobs. But at the same time, as an individual, if I'm buying a property and there is a complete free market and we're finding that a disproportionate number of foreign people are coming in, snapping up the property, driving at the property prices, and the locals are getting priced out, well, the government then, I think, does need to make some decisions on what is reasonable. And it's a balancing act. And it's very difficult because, things sway, the economy changes, and one has to adjust. And we've seen it in Singapore as an example. For a foreign buyer coming in here, they're paying 30% stamp duty.
Yeah.
In Australia a few years ago, if you're a foreign investor, the states, they introduced different stamp duties that were significantly higher than if you're a local. And it's a way to, then protect the prices of property. So I think there are certain circumstances whereby government legislation is a good thing so that locals can still afford to buy a property and not be priced out of the market. But to be able to use a sweeping statement to say, all foreign investment is bad would be very naive.
Yeah. And do you have anything to conclude in the next 1 minute or so, Richard?
Well, as I mentioned right at the beginning, I work for a company that's got global in its name, One Global Property Services. So it's a nice fit with my view of the world, that we are a more global world, an interdependent world. I work with clients from all over the world. I'm based here in Singapore, helping people to grow their wealth via well-researched overseas property. Very strong in the UK, but also other places like Australia, Germany, Portugal. And, I'd be more than happy to reach out to anybody who would like to have a chat about and continue the kind of conversation that we've had today. If they're interested, about accessing international property markets, again, more than happy to have a chat and to see how I can assist and hopefully, get to know you a bit better and meet another fellow global citizen.
Yeah, Richard, it's been such a delight having you and you being my co-host. And I'm looking forward to speaking with you, through the other topics. But from my heart, having known you through these months and having spoken to you in these depths, you are, I should say, not only a good person, good human being. You are exemplary to the young people or to a lot of us. Being able to accept the differences and also try to inculcate through your children about accepting differences. And I'm glad that we have you here in Singapore. And I'm so glad that you're also a testimony of your own company. That's your brand, right there, Richard.
Great. Well,
So
it's always a pleasure, Viki, to be on the show and always great conversation. And I hope the viewers that have been listening in via the live stream have learned a little bit about our lives and, the perspective of thinking global.
yeah, and more importantly, business now, Richard, it's all about values. What you stand for. It's not just about ROI anymore. I mean, you can have a portfolio with different ROI. You can have the blue chips. You can invest in many different things, putting money in different things, right? Different piggy banks. It's about making meaning out of the money. Whom do you put your money with? Where do you put your money with? What's the value they hold? What's behind that face or that name? What's behind that? I think the world is moving forward towards that. That's why you've got CSR, corporate social responsibility. But now it's more about that branding social responsibility, about what you stand for as a person, as a professional. And I'm glad I've spoken to you, and I'm looking forward to speaking to you much more and sharing your thoughts about the other topics. Would you like to close, Richard?
Sure. Again, it's been an absolute pleasure. I hope the viewers have enjoyed the conversation. I'll be intrigued to hear some of their feedback and look forward to our next episodes to continue watch this space.
Yes, and also just to reiterate, ladies and gentlemen, people who are either on live now or on replay, because if it's on YouTube, on Facebook, they can always watch it. Particularly on YouTube, they can always watch all the shows. We're going to talk about some of these topics that are close to my heart. Youth unemployment, meaningful jobs for young people, poverty, social media, politics is a dirty word. Is it? Can we make it better? How are we in this environment? Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. How are we moving to the next step, particularly something like a business? And also about family ties, family values. Yourself, I don't have any children, but yourself, what would you like to keep? What would you like to promote amongst your children? What you think we should discard? I do have a lot of words on that. What we should discard from my parents or my grandparents, and also we want to talk about will the world be the same with what's happening in Ukraine? So we want to hear from you, Richard. Thank you so much for being with us and being my co-host, and I do look forward to being with you and to the viewers. Please write to me at talkaboutlife777 at gmail.com to tell us, Richard and myself, that you would like to participate or you'd like to be a commentator or you would just would like to write in. your opinions. Thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you. See you
Yep,
soon.
so, yep, tomorrow, same time. Thank you, Richard. I'll talk to you. Bye.